Okay, welcome back, everyone. This has been a great discussion so far. We had Exelon earlier this morning talking about their internship program. I'm learning a ton as well. In fact, I have a junior at a college down in Tennessee, and he's already received a text from me that he needs to apply to the internship opportunities that we found out about this morning. So again, welcome back to our Delaware College and Career Exploration Days. As a reminder, if you are joining as a classroom, can you please update the amount of attendees that you have on with you today? We do know that we have some full classrooms that did sign up, and we just want to make sure that we capture the full amount of individuals that are participating with us this morning and over the course of the next 2 days. So I'm really personally very excited for this next panel discussion. It's with the Delaware Department of Education, and it's a path and a reason why you should become a teacher, especially here in Delaware. I'm excited to announce and introduce our panelists, James Simmons. He is the Chief Equity Officer from the Department of Education, and Dr. Fitzgerald, who is a principal at Highlands Elementary. James, if you want to turn your camera on, we can go ahead and get started. Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
So just a reminder, we do have some breaks here and there. So we did have a little bit of a pause, but we're back on now, and we've got some people participating with us. So the first thing I wanted to do is just get a brief description and introduction from each of you. What are your backgrounds and what job are you in right now, and how did you get to your job and your position? So ladies first.
Good morning, good morning, good morning. It's always a great day to talk about the field of education. I'm excited. There's a lot to be excited about right now in the field of education. Now, this can be a long answer or a short one. I'm going to give you the medium-sized version. I'm actually a native of the District of Columbia. I'm not from Delaware. I'm not really a Delawarean. And my mother actually worked at Howard University when I was little. And I always knew I wanted to go into the field of education, but there's a perception there that there's no money in education, or that people who are education majors really struggle. I actually started off in speech pathology. I have a degree in speech pathology. And then I just had to scratch that education itch. I wanted to teach, and it's something that I had to do. And I believe that if you follow your path, everything will line up. So from there, I did earn a master's degree in special education, which is one of my true loves. And from there, a master's degree also in educational administration. I finished my terminal degree, the doctorate of education and educational leadership, right here in the state of Delaware. So I've taught in DC. I've taught in the Prince George's County public school system. Love brought me to Delaware. And I've taught here at the Christina School District. I've worked in Appoquinimink, and now here I am in the Red Clay School District. And I'm the proud principal of Highlands Elementary School.
Awesome, thank you. And Mr. Simmons, your path and your journey to get where you are?
Again, thank you for having me. And it's a pretty simple path. Like Dr. Fitzgerald, I did not go to University of Delaware with the intent on becoming a teacher. I was an engineering major. As a young man, I thought I want to find a profession that makes a lot of money. We didn't grow up with a lot, and so that was what was driving money, or a dollar sign was driving it. I was fortunate that one of my high school football coaches was coaching basketball at Glasgow High School and asked me if I would coach the freshman team. I finished the freshman basketball season, and I immediately changed my major. And it sounds a little corny, but I fell in love with kids. I fell in love with the relationship that you make with kids. And so I went to my college advisor and said, what's the easiest way that I can change a major and still graduate within the time limits of this football scholarship? Because I knew my parents couldn't afford to pay for the rest. So I'm born and raised in Delaware. I've been here my entire life. I've spent the last 24 years, I was in multiple roles in the Brandywine School District, but the first 5 years of my career, I bounced around because I was looking for different coaching opportunities. So I've been blessed that I've taught in rural areas. I've taught at Milford, I've taught in Parochial, I've taught at St. Mark's, I taught at Votech at Delcastle, and then my last, like I said, 24 in Brandywine, where I'm very proud of the fact that I rose up the ladder without skipping any rungs. And I think that it enabled me to be a better leader, because when I look down the ladder in terms of positions, I've been in those seats and I can see it from their eyes, and I've never let that go. I'm currently, and I guess maybe I'll say this, 2 years ago, I was asked to serve as the Director of Innovation Improvement. It's an appointed position by the governor to the Department of Ed, and I'm overseeing improving educational outcomes for students who reside within our city limits. In July, that position was rebranded, or my office was rebranded into the Office of Equity and Improvement. While I still oversee those other responsibilities, it includes equity for the state of Delaware and trying to make sure we have equitable outcomes and opportunities for all students. So I'm certainly glad to be here to speak about something that means as much to me as anything, because I said the most important thing that we can do for our society is to educate it.
Absolutely. I think you skipped one thing, because you were a principal as well.
I was a two-time principal. I was the principal of Mount Pleasant High School and my alma mater. And so, so speaking of that, so I was the principal of Mount Pleasant, and where I was deemed a turnaround leader. I don't know that I did. I think our teachers did the bulk of the work, and I got the credit. But the proud part of that is now my son is attending my alma mater, and he's wearing the same number that I wore when I was a student there. So that's one of those proud dad moments that you don't often get in other fields that you get in education.
That's great. That's great.
That's awesome.
So let's get into some of our panel questions. So Dr. Fitzgerald, how did you find your passion in education? So I know we saw your path, but how did you find your passion?
I think that for me personally, my passion actually came when I was very little. When I was little, I was the person who wanted to play school with friends, who wanted to teach other people how to read. When I was little, I taught my cousin how to read on the doorstep of my grandmother's house. But something also happened to me when I was little. There was a little girl who lived around the corner from me, and she had exceptionalities, and she was shunned in the neighborhood, and no one would play with her, and no one would talk to her, and she wasn't treated fairly. And I said, well, why are we treating this young lady like this? And so it was at that moment that I wanted to begin to advocate for people like the person who lived around the corner from me. So that was one experience. Something else happened to me excuse me, when I was younger. I lived in DC, and from my bedroom window, I could see the top of the monument. And I grew up in the 80s, and during the 80s, there was a lot that was happening with education, and there was a lot that was happening in the city, and this phenomenon dropped in my head, right? And I tried to understand, how come we're so close to the nation's capital, but we couldn't get kids to read in fourth grade? And I said, God, how does this happen? And for me, it just that sparked my passion. I would say the issues and the trends of education, but also personal experiences. That experience with the young lady around the corner. I had an experience. I taught my cousin how to read on my grandmother's porch, and just my mother, I think, also surrounding me and nurturing me in Howard University. She worked for the School of Education. And so I had very early exposures to education. I had very early exposures to college and secondary education. And I had a very early look at that exposure. And so I think that helped me. That was my passion right there.
That's great. I will say, I have a bachelor's in education from the University of Delaware as well. And one of the things I said I would never do was teach first grade, because the responsibility of teaching someone how to read was something that just really freaked me out. So
it is very multifaceted. But when you see that light bulb go off and you see someone learn how to read for the first time, when you see that first sentence, that joy. That's nothing great. Like that joy.
That's great. Just as a reminder, which I forgot to do in the beginning, if you have any questions for our panelists, please drop them in the Q&A. We're going to get to that at the end, but let's continue. So, Mr. Simmons, just put simply, why should someone who's watching us today, why should they become a teacher?
So I think I said it already, and I think maybe I'll go into a little more detail. I do believe with all the pluses and minuses, the pros and cons that we often hear about education, it's the most important thing that we do. No one has any profession, I don't care who you are, how much money you make, what field you go into, without being educated. Everyone has talked about reading. I don't know that I could teach anyone to read because I was a secondary person, but those signs that we've often seen, those bumper stickers that say everything I need to know I learned in kindergarten, it rings true to me because I remember turning my son over to a teacher and he came back and he could read. And as bright as he may appear to be, I don't know, it didn't happen or couldn't have happened if it wasn't for his kindergarten teacher teaching him to read. And so to me, you can't become a doctor without a teacher. You can't become an engineer without a teacher. You can't become a teacher without a teacher. You can't become a construction worker or go into the military. So education to me and what we do, and our society is better the more and the better that we're educated, right? Like having the ability to learn of and about other cultures, other communities, those things make society a better place to be because then you have an appreciation for what I say is our differences, but more importantly, our similarities. We're way more similar than we are different, and you get a chance to learn that in education. And so, and if you're fortunate enough to have a teacher who understands that, because the most important thing we can do to children is put good teachers in front of them. And so I think that education has always had that value for me from an early age. And some teachers saved my life. My parents were divorced and I was angry and didn't know it. And sports and a teacher got a hold of me to say, like, we've got to funnel your energies in a different manner. And they were saying the same thing that my parents were saying, but they said it a different way, and I finally heard it. So it just rings true that again, simplifying it is the most important thing we can do for our society.
And I think the power of what you just said is that teachers are more than just teaching us, our ABCs and our 1, 2, 3s. They're just a very big part of our students' lives. And to be able to make a difference in somebody's life, I know it's just an amazing feeling. So thank you. Dr. Fitzgerald, so, obviously we are in a pandemic and we have some challenges. So what are some of the biggest challenges that are facing teachers today? And if you could just highlight some of that.
Sure. I want to say something before I get to that, though. And you said something. You said teaching is very multifaceted, and there's something I've noticed as we've evolved in the field of education. Schools are also multifaceted. Schools, teaching used to be very linear with regard to pedagogy, teaching and learning, but now teachers have a larger role in a child's life now. It's more than just the teaching and learning. It's almost a little bit of social work. It's almost a little bit of counseling in there. I think it was always there. And this really goes into what you really just asked. Teaching is very multifaceted. Schools are very multifaceted, but now we're seeing even the more so the need for good people in front of children. We see the need for really skilled people who are in front of the children. One thing I definitely think that is an issue and a trend right now in education is that we have to make certain that we're culturally competent, right? We have to make sure that the world, it's unfolding before us. The world isn't black, the world isn't white, the world is very multifaceted. There's out of many, we are one. And we have to remember that there are many cultures, there are many differences, and we have to really be very culturally competent with that right now. And I think in addition to that, we have to be very compassionate, right? Because really when COVID is over, even before it's over, there's a lot that we're going to see afterwards. We're going to see the aftermath, right, of parents being able to connect electronically. You're going to see the aftermath of parents not being able to connect. We're going to see the aftermath, right, of kids who were able to attend, those who were not, those who were displaced, those who were transitioned. So we have to be very multifaceted. We have to make sure that we're culturally competent. We have to make sure that we're patient, because we're going to see a lot of different things. We're starting to see it. Even 3 months, March 13th, things happened very quickly, but there were a lot of things we started to see then. We started to see students displaced, families displaced, and there are aftermath situations from that. There are going to be gaps that we're going to have to fill because of that. So I think that right now we have to make sure that we're ready to fill those gaps. We have to make sure that we're ready to unify student bodies and cultures and things of that sort. We have to really make sure that we have that compassion. We're here for children, and I love teachers. I love everyone who works in the building, but children first. Children are our business, and we have to really keep that at the forefront of our mind.
Right. And when I'm really thinking about what the purpose of this event is, and we're really talking about why should individuals that are logging on right now become a teacher, or what are some of the skills that are necessary? And I'm hearing being adaptable, being able to pivot, being compassionate. So those, even though you need those hard skills to become a teacher, those soft skills are so important.
Those soft skills, we have to be restorative. Kids are going to come. They're not going to know how to communicate. My mommy lost her job and I couldn't log on. Kids, a 5-year-old can't communicate that, right? But we have to be so compassionate enough to be able to restore that child back into school and say, it's okay. No matter what you come with, I'm going to be able to reach you, and we're going to get these Dolch sight words, and we're going to get on to unit 2.3. But we have to be so compassionate enough and so restorative, because kids are we're going to see some aftermath after this, I think. And you're very correct. Very correct.
So, Mr. Simmons, on the Department of Education level, so what are we doing on that level to keep both educators and students safe during this pandemic?
Well, I think the first thing that we're doing is that, there's a lot of things around the Department of Public Health who's providing guidance around the safety around the pandemic. But I think we've also got to be cognizant of, again, that soft skills with communicating with families and getting their input and being flexible around that. To have a strict guideline would be a mistake in my opinion, because what can work for me in this situation doesn't work for Dr. Fitzgerald and her family. And so we've got to understand that around teachers. The flexibilities, I meet with most of the superintendents, obviously through Zoom or some kind of way, to just talk about what does it look like in their district, because a percentage in one district wants and requires one thing, and a population or percentage in another district wants and requires something very different. So being able to be flexible around the guidance that the department has provided through our support and our working collaboration with Department of Public Health around the pandemic piece is one thing, but there's also another piece around the socio-emotional piece of what we're going through. And oftentimes we try to put people in pockets, whether it's by race, whether it's by socioeconomics. Well, now when we talk about that social-emotional piece, that happens regardless of what you have or you don't have. I often use my son as an example because it's easy to do that versus picking on someone else's kid. But when you're in trauma, it impacts when you learn, right? And so trauma, we talk about those ACEs that we've had that were 10, this pandemic has probably added another 5, right? There's things that are happening mostly for kids that we didn't see coming. And so we've got to be cognizant to keep our eye on that to see what does it look like. And I think the question has to change from what's wrong with you to what has happened to you. And things are happening differently for families now that none of us ever foresaw. And so we've got to be very cognizant of that. So I think, again, keeping them safe is multifaceted in terms of looking at the guidance around the medical piece, but then looking at the mental health piece that's also so vital to a student and teachers being prepared to learn. There's a number of teachers who aren't comfortable going back and now have some trauma that we've got to be prepared to look at. And I'd argue that anytime you have something that happens, in this case, that appears to be a negative, it's also an opportunity to do things differently. I don't know that we'll ever go back to our old normal in terms of what schools have looked like. My wife's a teacher, and I've said to her, I don't know that we'll ever have a snow day again. Think about that. We've created an opportunity where we can now educate throughout a snow day or through, inclement weather or whatever the case may be. So which also gives us some safety. So that call around just inclement weather where we got to think, is it safe to bring kids back because the storm hits at a certain time? We can now make a quicker decision to say, no, we're not coming back. Everybody's logging on and we're going to have synchronous learning today, right? So I think that the opportunity that this pandemic created gives us some ability to add additional layers of safety. But I think of all the things I think we've got to look at is what is the mental health issues and the social emotional piece that is now going to be impacted in education and for families and students.
Absolutely. I had a graduating senior last year, so I know that that emotional piece was really difficult last year. So I agree with that. And I love the idea, again, that there's this ability to pivot and to sort of see something on a bright side. No snow, if it's snowing outside, okay, well, we can go to online learning now. So that little piece of positivity in all of this. So this is for either one of you, and we can decide who to answer, but how is education changing in America? And what does that mean for the new generation of teachers? So those that are logged on with us today, what's changing in our educational system and what do they need to know about?
Well, I think Mr. Simmons really began the conversation right here, right? Of what's changing. There are lots of opportunities. Think also about the electronic opportunities that this has allowed us or afforded us. Think about students who could or who have injuries. My son is home. He had an injury and I'm like, oh, there's no excuse. Get your Chrome, go on to Schoology and let's get that work done. Sick days will never be the same. Illnesses, students who may have a phobia or phobias really with school and school attendance. There are some very special populations that really this answers the call. I think that the skill that's necessary is the skill that this generation is really already plugged into, and that's that technology piece. These kids, the generation now, the folks who are in high school and secondary, they are ready for it, and they're already within the trajectory. I teach a class at Wilmington University, and we had to move the class from in person to online, and the kids in the class were like, oh, that's going to be so easy. They were so happy. And I was like, oh my goodness, wait a minute. Let me pivot. Let me find my folders and put everything in the folder and find the Zoom and Pear Deck and make it interactive. And they were like, all you'd have to do is hit the button. It was so very simple. But for me, it just wasn't as simple because, my perception of technology was Atari 2600 when I was little, if you can remember that. So I think this generation is already in position to go where the issue and trend for education is going. Education will now take off. We'll be, we can have a class in Wilmington, but you can also Zoom at a class in Newark. You can go to a class in DC. How about you go to another state or another country at the same time? So I think these guys are in position technologically.
The only thing I'll add to that, I know we have a limited time, but I think I saw a question in the chat, was that it gives adults a chance to learn from children. Oftentimes, education has always been adult-centered, and the adult dictates the way that the kids are going to learn. Well, now we get a chance to learn from them. I know that while I think that I'm tech savvy, there's a ton of times where I'll say to my son, hey, can you show me how to do X, right? And so Dr. Fitzgerald mentioned it, or also saying that, like the students told her just to click the button. So they can simplify things, but it's because they have a much deeper understanding of the technology that we do. So I think that it's an opportunity for us to learn from students as well.
I love that. The teacher is always learning. Love it. So I have one more question really quickly, and then we do have lots of questions coming in from our Q&A, and I'm actually getting text messages too. So this is something that I definitely want to make sure that we ask. So what are some opportunities that you recommend students should take advantage of while they're in school currently? Is there anything that could set them up for a position as a teacher?
So I think it's important so that there's a number of clubs like, Future Teachers of America or Future Educators of America. There's pathways, the Teacher Academy, if you want to go into education. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say this, because I think it's important when you look at the two educators that you chose to be on this panel. We've got to diversify our education, our teachers, right? So, and this is in no meaning to be this meaning, but education for historically has been a system that was designed to educate the white male. And then at some point they decided to allow Blacks and women to fit into their system. So we get a chance to redo the system. But then it's also been a profession that's been dominated by white females. And so the one way we can do is put successful people in front of kids who look like them. So we need African Americans or people of colors. We also need males. Like when you look at elementary schools, we're missing males at elementary. And if that's the number one impact, having people that look like you in front of you, then we got to look at the diversity of the group or the demographics of the group. And then we've got to try to match our field to do that. So I think that you've got to look at those things and say, those are the things that we can do. But I do think that we've got to start to put yourself in those groups. I say to teachers all the time, if you want to be a better teacher, get involved in teaching opportunities. Spend your time doing things around professional development that isn't necessarily content driven. Sometimes it's relationship giving, sometimes it's leadership, because leadership's oftentimes means administration. I don't think so, because you're the leader of your class. And so what are you doing to lead your class? Understanding the impact of all those soft skills that we've mentioned throughout the different answers that we've provided. So I think that you've got to be cognizant of all those things, but figure out the level you want to work and start to working with kids in, like I mentioned, coaching basketball, but it could be working at a daycare center. Any of those opportunities to be around kids, to learn the importance of those relationships, because all of my favorite stories around education have nothing to do with earth science, right? They have to do with the things that happen on a personal level with kids and families and that sort of thing. So
we've got a ton of questions coming in, but I also just wanted to pivot on a question that I received is, not only is it important for our teachers to be culturally diverse, but also our curriculum. And I think Dr. Fitzgerald, you sort of touched on that a little bit. I don't know if you want to give a sentence.
Absolutely. I think that our schools have evolved, our cultures and climates have evolved. And I think that Mr. Simmons opened this book here. So I'm going to read a paragraph or two. I think that as we begin to staff our schools with populations of teachers that really diversify the field and really mirror what the school population is, we also have to consider the curriculum. We have to go to the next level. I think that there is an opportunity there, particularly for not just for women, not just for men, not for boys, not for girls, but everyone needs to see a representation, right, of themselves when they open the curriculum. It's time.
If I can jump on that real quick, I know you have a ton of questions. In my office, we're currently doing an audit of the social studies standards to make sure that they're inclusive, right, of all groups, and making sure that not only are they inclusive of the groups, but the specific history of Delaware. So we're starting with social studies, and then we'll grow to each of our content. So I know Ms. Joanne has a ton of questions, so I just wanted to make sure.
And I'm just going to plug FAME right there. You do realize that that's part of our academics, is that we do culturally competent curriculum. So I have to plug our organization. So I'm going to ask maybe one or two, hopefully final questions. So these have to be quick answers. What do you need to become a teacher?
Well, of course, you need your degree in education. You would need a degree in education. With regards to that degree, you would definitely need your student teaching. If you do not have a degree in teaching and learning, which gives you the pedagogy, how to teach, what to teach. If you do not have that, there is a way. Don't worry. If you want to get a degree in something else, or a degree in another bachelor's area, you can. We have something in the state of Delaware called Alternative Routes to Teaching, and that's how you can go through, matriculate through that program, and you can become certified that way. But traditionally, we would hope that a candidate receives a bachelor's degree in education with that student teaching. And don't worry, the jobs are there. It's plentiful. I have to put a plug in for special education. If you have a special education endorsement, it's a marketable skill. Don't worry, you'll be fine.
This has been great, and I could talk about education all day long, but it is 10:30 and we are keeping these to 30 minutes. And again, everybody that asked a question in that Q&A, I apologize. We had such a robust conversation, so we will follow up as much as we can with all of these questions. And thank you so much, Mr. Simmons and Dr. Fitzgerald, and have a great day educating the future workforce of our state.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.